Yeah, so I just wanted to do a quick video about ways to make chord scale sound a bit more musical. There's a few ways to do this, but I just wanted to talk about resolving them. And I've kind of talked about this in an older video, but I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing this up again because it's such a fundamental thing. And I hope people who have worked on chord scales but don't really know how to make them sound musical might watch this and get something out of it. So we're just going to start with the altered scale, because I think the altered scale in some ways is the most obscure one to hear. It doesn't really relate obviously to intervals we're used to in Western music. It sounds a bit like this. Kind of very at that point, but then it also goes and it has that going on, so it's all a bit peculiar. Okay, I want to talk about the fact that the altered scale is really just voice leading. So it has all these sort of nice fruity notes in it. That all resolve to certain notes of the chord. So we're just going to take a simple C major 7th chord. I'm going to think about all the chord tones in that. C, E, G, B, C again. E, G, B, C. And we're just going to run a altered scale for a bar for 8 eighth notes, and then we're going to resolve it into C major 7th somehow. So let's just start with the root. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Okay, right away we run into a problem because we don't want to be repeating a note. How we want to resolve this note is by a half step or maybe a whole step. So let's start one note higher. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. That's much better, right? Or we could start one note lower. Or we could, for that matter, if we use that one, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, we could resolve to the third, like that. And then you get a little enclosure, actually within the altered scale. How cool is that? Okay, so another thing we could do is we could just take one of the notes off and start it on the upbeat, and that would sound kind of a bit hipper anyway. So it'd be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, like that, right? So starting on G, but we're starting on G like an eighth note later. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And if you're thinking, oh, this reminds me of bebop scales and stuff like that, then you'd be absolutely right, because actually how we choose scales and arpeggios has a lot to do with rhythm. It's not, pitches and rhythms are kind of intimately connected. They're not just separate things that we think about completely independently of each other, right? I mean, I think one of the things I dislike about chord scale theory is the fact that it tends to make people think, like, oh, well, as long as I'm playing the right pitches over that chord, it's going to sound good. And actually, there's a lot of horizontal stuff going on in jazz harmony as well, where you're kind of targeting a chord and moving towards it. And that's where I find Barry Harris's teaching really helpful, for instance. But there's another book by Hal Galper called Forward Motion, which explores this idea in some detail. And the idea is that you should really think of the phrases going across the bar line, which is what we're doing here. So instead of thinking like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, we're thinking, or this and 1, sorry, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. It's two separate things. So maybe we have a phrase on the G7 and a phrase on the C major, so that we're thinking of them being connected through the bar line. 1 and 2 and 3. So they all form like one whole phrase, and one chord change goes into the next. Of course, you can do the same thing if we let's set this into 2-5-1 and have a D Dorian mode. We can do the same thing again. So we can go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, for instance. And now I'm using a little chromatic. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, just to give it this little enclosure, just make it a little bit more interesting. So that's another way you can make it interesting. I mean, you could just go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, just come down again. But that doesn't sound as hip as going 1 and 2 and 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. That little enclosure figure kind of makes it sound a bit more jazz. So we go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And we could come down again like that. Yeah? So everything is connected by a half step, but we have that scalar material in between. Let me play it again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Okay? And notice that I'm not doing anything clever there. I'm not adding in any sort of intervallic stuff. I'm just adding in like one little chromatic thing here. But the line still works without it. That's what I was adding in, but the line still works without it. It goes like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think this sounds a bit better if you go 1, 2, 3. Sorry, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. This thing sounds a bit better if you play it like that, right? Okay.